Hello, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Please let me know in the comments where you guys are tuning in from today. What state, what city, what country, what town. I've a very special guest with me today, none other than Ray McGovern. Ray is a former CIA analyst. He worked in the CIA in the 1980s and prepared the president's daily brief. And in protest of the CIA's involvement in torture, Ray returned his intelligence commendation medal in 2006 that he got after retirement. And he also co-founded Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity's, VIPS, in 2003. And his website is raymcgovern.com, so please do check it out. Ray, thank you for taking the time to do the interview. It's great to have you back on again.
You're most welcome, Richard. Glad to be with you.
I first wanted to touch on the passing of Daniel Ellsberg. He died a few days ago at age 92. He was also your friend. Could you maybe just share with us how you first met him, and how you first got to know him?
Well, I'll keep it short. It's a long story. When the Iraq War broke out, despite all of our warnings that there were no weapons of mass destruction there and that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11, contrary to how our populace was propagandized, I got a call from a professor at American University. It was 3 days after the war started. He said, "Ray, we're going to have this teach-in, just like Vietnam. I would like you to talk about the falsification of intelligence before the attack. Could you do that?" I said, "Well, of course I can do that, but how much time do you have?" And he says, 10 minutes. 10 minutes better than nothing, right? So I show up there. The person before me was a fellow named Daniel Ellsberg. I had not met him before, but he was already a hero of mine, okay? And what he said, I remember it distinctly, was not, "I'm Daniel Ellsberg, and I was right about Vietnam, and I warned." I said, "You know what he said?" He said, "Don't do what I did." I waited too long. I knew in 1964 that we were being lied to in this war. I knew chapter and verse because I was in the inside. And I waited until 1971. When the bombs had long since started to fall, when all the lies were coming to fruition. Don't do what I did. Don't wait. Do it now. Do it courageously. Do it at whatever personal risk you may incur, but do it now before the battle rages, and you could save a whole bunch of lives. And if you face some imprisonment, well, it's still worth it to prevent the slaughter that I've seen with my own eyes and that others have seen on active duty. He also warned more recently that that asking people to make the sacrifice of blowing the whistle from the inside and running the risk of the rest of their life in prison, Dan said it's worth it. Now, that's easy to say, except for one person, that is Dan Ellsberg. It wasn't easy for him to say, but when he marched up to that interview before the trial, they asked him, "Are you thinking about spending the rest of your life in prison?" And he just instinctively said, "Wouldn't you do that? Wouldn't you do that to prevent this war?" Hello. So what I'm saying here is that Daniel Ellsberg was the paragon, was the model for all other whistleblowers. And we have a whistleblower society, so to speak. It's called the Sam Adams Associates for Integrity. We have 21 years of experience. We started with Colleen Rowley of the FBI. We've had Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and Cy Hirsch. And we gave our most recent award to Daniel Ellsberg. Now, it was after he had told everybody, not everybody, but we knew about his pancreatic cancer. So on April 11th, we had a very small ceremony in his home with someone representing Sam Adams. And you could tell that Dan was not well. As a matter of fact, our representative had lunch with him and said, I was really concerned that Dan would be able to do this because he wasn't real good over lunch. Well, he was eloquent. And at the very end, last 3 minutes, he summoned up the rest of his strength and he said, don't do what I did. Don't do it. Do it now. Do it before the bombs start falling. How moving that is, you know? And so that was the portion that in my most recent article, I pushed, because there are people within the British government now, depleted uranium shells, for God's sake. There are people in the American government that know what's planned, for example, against China. We could get into a two-front war. Those people need to know that Dan Ellsberg speaks with some authority when he says, don't do what I did in waiting, and be prepared. Make the sacrifice. You're a human being. If you can prevent the slaughter of thousands of other human beings, do it.
Yeah, Ray,
he was also a friend of mine.
You answered my second question. I was actually going to ask you exactly about this point that Dan Ellsberg said that whistleblowers shouldn't wait too long. So despite his bravery, he's still he's still very humble and says that he should have done it earlier, which I think says a lot about his character.
Yeah, Richard, there's a codicil to that, which I probably owe to your audience. He did prevent worse in Vietnam. He did do that before 1971 with the Pentagon Papers. It's a really interesting story. I could tell it about 2 minutes. Is that okay?
Please do, by all means.
Okay. Well, Dan had been in Vietnam. He was a Marine, for God's sake. And even after he became a civilian, he went there to see what it was like. He came back and said, this is a god-awful thing. Somebody's got to do something about this, okay? So we get to 1967. I'm working on Soviet foreign policy toward Vietnam, toward China, toward the whole part of Asia. And my friend Sam Adams is working on finding out how many Viet Cong there are under arms in South Vietnam. Guess what? No one had done that before. We're talking 1965, 66, 67. They were still working from the French records from the French and the Chinese. Well, okay. So Sam got all these intercepts and all these aerial photographs and everything else together and spy reports and said, wow, there are between 500 and 600,000 Viet Communists, if you will, under arms in South Vietnam. And everybody said, my God, that can't be right, Sam. Why not? Because General Westmoreland in Saigon says there can't be more than 299,000. Whoa. Now, I could tell you the reason for that, but it'd be better for me to explain it using the words of General Creighton Abrams. Abrams? Yeah, right. He has a tank named after him.
Right.
Was he a good tanker? Patton said that Abrams was almost as good as Patton. Okay. Does Abrams know much about political affairs? Well, listen to this little story. I'm having lunch with Sam Adams. It's August 20th, 1967. And I'm saying, Sam, for God's sake, your numbers are correct. You've pored over this. You've had all our colleagues look them over. Why? Why in God's name would a general running a war de-emphasize or make short the count of the enemy? I mean, they inflate it.
Right.
He says, Ray, you won't believe this, but this morning there was a notice came in from General Abrams in Saigon. Abrams was General Westmoreland's deputy, okay? Miss Westmoreland was traveling somewhere, so Abrams wrote the cable. And this is what Abrams says. Sam tells me. He said, we can't possibly go with Sam Adams's numbers, however accurate they may be, because we have been projecting an image of success in this war. And there is no amount of caveats that we could possibly adduce to prevent the press in Saigon from drawing an erroneous and gloomy conclusion. That's a direct quote. Now,
Wow.
I should have asked Sam if I could have a copy of that cable. I should have given it to the New York Times. I didn't. That's another story, okay? But I said, wow, Sam, there it is, right in black and white. Why do you suppose he'd do that? Because he's a good tanker and he's a lousy politician. There it is, right on the record, okay? Now, what happens? Sam fights the good fight. He lines up every other intelligence agency in Washington to agree to his numbers, except, of course, the Army, Westmoreland being an Army general, and they go to the acme of the intelligence profession, the National Intelligence Estimate process. I know that. I shared a couple of estimates myself. This is a big deal. Finally, at the last stage, the director of Central Intelligence in charge of all these agencies gets them all together and says, all right, gentlemen, it was in those days, it was all gentlemen. All right, gentlemen, here we have this estimate. What do you think? Oh, yeah, all kinds of executives from the Army, okay? So what does Director Richard Helms do? He says, well, we'll take it off the table. How does he explain that to Sam Adams? He said, look, Sam, my job is to protect the CIA. And I can't protect the CIA if we get involved in a pissing match with the U.S. Army at war. So forget about it.
Oh, man.
That was August 1967. Now, late January 1968, the Tet Offensive, countrywide offensive, every hamlet, village, province, whatever you have in Vietnam, that cities, Saigon, are attacked by how many people? Well, actually, it seemed to be about 600,000, right? Okay. So what happens? Well, people in the Pentagon, people at CIA finally had to tell LBJ, look, we've been undercounting the number of enemy. It doesn't look really good. People will claim that Ted was a defeat for the VC because we survived, but nobody's going to buy that. Right. The jig is sort of up, but Westmoreland is in Washington saying, look, all I need is 206,000 more troops. That's all I need. Okay. And we'll go to Laos and Cambodia. Maybe we'll go up into North Vietnam. Up to China. We can do it. All I need is 206,000 more, 206,000 more troops. Yeah. And we won't get involved in nuclear. I know you don't want nuclear, LBJ, but we can do it, right? So what happened? It all comes to a head. And what Les Gelb, we only learned this later, and most people won't know who Les Gelb was. He was number 3 in the Defense Department. He came out of the Bronx. He's a New Yorker, and he knows which end is up, and he knows how to be honest. He leaks to Neil Sheehan and Rick Smith of the New York Times the notion that Westmoreland is seeking 206,000 more troops. Whoa! It goes up on I think it was the 9th of February. No, the 9th of March, right after the thing was over. Big headline, big major story, okay? Now, the reason I mention all this is Dan Ellsberg, he knew Sam Adams. He met him in Vietnam when Sam was there in one of his trips. But Dan Ellsberg looks at this and says, my God, he didn't know it was Les Gelb, who happened to be a good friend of Ellsberg. But my God, somebody has leaked Westmoreland's numbers. And there's a big to-do about, what we should do now. Why don't I leak Sam Adams' numbers? Why don't I tell the American people that the agency, the CIA, had statistics, had analysis showing there were between 500 and 600,000 troops, and that was falsified by the military. Why did I go ahead and do that? He did it. that was Dan Ellsberg's very first leak. Okay, he leaked it 10 days after Les Gelb did the Westmoreland request. Okay, what happens 1 week later? LBJ convenes a small group of confidants and says, "We've had it. Nobody trusts us anymore. I would have given Westy those 206,000 men, but the leaks have hurt us beyond repair. We're not going to do it. Tell Westy no. Tell Westy to come home. We'll make him Army Chief of Staff, for God's sake. Tell him to come home. And besides, next week, I'm going to declare that I'm not going to run for president again." Wow. That all happened within 1 month. Okay. March of 1968, after the Tet Offensive. So just to close this thing up, why do I cite that? Because Dan told that story in his book. I should have it here. The book is called Secrets, okay? It's here somewhere. And I read, he gave me that. He gave me a nice little inscription after our meeting there at the American University. And I read the damn thing through, and I said, well, wait a second, Dan. And it's not like you didn't speak up before 1971. You prevented Westmoreland going up to the Chinese border, for God's sake, in 1968. And you know what happens when you go up to the Chinese border? Hello, anybody who knows about Korea knows about that. Okay, so I said, right. Dan, this is really good. So I confirmed it with him. That was really the case. And in the citation accompanying the Sam Adams Award for Integrity, I wrote up that sequence of events. And when he was faced with it in receiving the award, he said, "Oh, wow, I remember that." And since then, I've found out it was Les Gelb that made that encouraged me to do my thing with Sam Adams statistics. And I didn't think you'd focus on this, but yeah, that was my first leak. So, long story short, but it shows what I call felicitous, lucky, well-timed leaks can do. And to his last breath, virtually, Dan Ellsberg was saying precisely that. Do it now. Let people know at your own risk, but my God, thousands of people may be spared because of your courage.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, that's the first takeaway, and the second is that it's funny how just a handful of people can play with politics and lie to each other. In the same country. It's it's a. I wanted to ask you, Ray, before we get into the Ukraine and the rest of it. Just how does the CIA recruit people? How do they develop assets, right? Because I mean, I know you have people that are threatened, others that are paid off. But how did you end up working as an analyst for them? And what about assets that are developed? Could you get into that for us?
Well, Richard, I hate to say it because it betrays my age, but I suppose looking at me does the same. In 1960, I had been majoring in Russian because I loved it. It was just fun, and I taught it later. And little did I know that the Berlin Wall would fall, and that eventually, but the crisis at Checkpoint Charlie would take shape, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, all that stuff. In other words, little did I know that I would be prepared to make a special contribution, being fluent in Russian, and my master's was in history and Russian history and Russian area studies, they called it at the time. So when John Kennedy got up on his inauguration and said, look, we got a fresh new look here in Washington. Come on down and do something for your country. Don't be asking what your country can do for you.
Yeah.
Now, that didn't sound corny in those days, Richard. Didn't sound corny at all. And there were a whole bunch of thousands of us, thousands of us came down thinking we had something special to contribute. And my Russian background was that something. So I contacted the CIA representative whose telephone number was in the New York phone book, for God's sake. They didn't recruit at Fordham. They recruited at Yale and Harvard and Tufts and people who are the best and the brightest, the kind of Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan kind, or the kinds like those fellas that were the best and the brightest in Vietnam. So it was a little odd that I kind of applied, but they said, "Oh, you've got a pretty good record. Oh, you speak Russian? Yeah, we'll take this test, all day test, little vignette, all day test, all day." And then I was playing for Fordham basketball. We had to play Army that night, and I fouled out at the end. We lost by 2 points, but it was it was a long day for me. Anyhow, I passed muster. They let me complete my military duty, 2 years as an Army intelligence, infantry intelligence officer. Learned a lot doing that. And then, of course, there was a natural progression into the analytic ranks of CIA. They gave me a portfolio right off the bat that I couldn't have dreamed of. It was relations between Russia and China, Russia and Vietnam, Russia and Japan, the whole East, and the international communist movement. Man, it was just a terrific thing. And in those early days, we were able to follow what President Truman, who set up the CIA, really wanted. Now, what he wanted was what he called untainted intelligence. Okay, untreated was the actual word he used. Tell it like it is. You work for me. You don't work for the State Department. You don't work for the Pentagon. You work for me. I control your career. You tell me what you really think. We were able to do that, at least in Soviet foreign policy terms, until Casey and Gates came in the 80s. Then it became much more difficult. And I finally left in 1990 when the Soviet Union had imploded. I patted myself on the back and said, well, not just you, Ray, but we worked real hard to do it, and left to work down in the inner city of Washington in the full expectation that George H.W. Bush's vision would be completed. That is, a Europe free and secure from Lisbon to Vladivostok. You know what happened after that when Clinton came in. So that was how I got in, how I went out. The place has been totally corrupted now. It used to be the analysis division and the operations people. They're all mixed together now. And the analysis people are no better than the people who run the operations. Witness they go along with this blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, for God's sake. Anybody in our day would have told the director of Central Intelligence or director of CIA, Bill Burns, look, this is a cockamamie thing. Yeah, big deal that you can do it. Think about the next day, huh? So
Right.
There's none of that now. And I have been saying openly that whereas before I was reluctant to throw the analysis division out with the bathwater, okay? Right now, I think the whole thing should be disestablished, set up an analysis unit somewhere else in the government, okay? Independent as possible, and let those people blow up stuff and assassinate people, let them work somewhere else, maybe at the Pentagon. They don't belong in an intelligence analysis agency.
I mean, the day the Nord Stream pipeline attack happened, the first thing I said, it's either Britain or America. It's one of the two, or together basically. And Russia, they have the capability, but why would they blow up their own pipeline? And I mean, what did you think of this? I think you kind of just gave me your thoughts on this attack, but also the lack of response from European countries. Like they're so scared to criticize NATO and the US. It's astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, just to pick up on the blowing up of the pipeline and the blowing up or destruction of that dam there in
Right.
Ukraine, to claim that the Russians were responsible, let's say, for the dam would be to say that it didn't occur to them that if they want to flood that thing, they could have just, opened the sluices, They have to blow up the damn thing. They have an incredibly powerful lever here. Why blow it up? Just let the waters out if you like. Put it back together. So
the same thing with the pipeline. They can just, they did turn it off.
Took the words right out of my mouth. Of course, the pipeline, they had turned it off, but it could easily have been turned back on. And so why deprive yourself of that leverage? Now, you asked me something else now. I got so excited about the pipeline that it escapes me at the moment.
No, it's I was hinting at the lack of response from European countries, because Denmark, Germany, and Norway were all conducting investigations as if they don't know.
Well, you remember that wonderful cartoon with the lemmings, these little animals, at the edge of the cliff, and they're looking down, and one lemming says to the other one, "Oh, do we really have to do this?" And the second one says, "To do anything less would be to betray the history of our lemmingness." So I know Germany real well. I lived there for 5 years, worked there for 5 years. And I could say the trite thing like some of my best friends are Germans, and they are. But my God, when are they going to grow up, for God's sake? Now, my friend Gil Doctorow has written a wonderful piece showing that the evolution, or I would say devolution, of the SPD, the Social Democratic Party, just started just shortly after Willy Brandt and Egon Bahr had such a good thing going with their Ostpolitik toward Russia. And this is just a culmination of a bunch of hacks, political hacks, that don't know much about the world and are going to really incur incredible damage to the German economy and everything else. So let me just say one more word about why these allies, we all say allies and partners. We got allies and partners. Okay. Now, I was asked to brief the UN Security Council back in late February. And so, sure, that sounds like good. Jeffrey Sachs did it remotely, big screen there. And then I was able to be there in person. I flew up in the morning, flew back at night. And right before that resolution was discussed, the resolution being, this is an act of war blowing up this pipeline. Should we not have a Security Council authorized investigation? And the Russians were pleading for that. And they got this resolution. And that morning, every one of the Security Council members got a memo from the governments of Germany, Denmark, and Sweden. And what did that memo say? Don't worry about it. We've got it covered. We are doing a thorough investigation of this. So no need for a Security Council to get involved with. Leave it to us.
Sure, sure thing.
That's the way. Well, as Jeffrey Sachs pointed out earlier, the Swedes had already investigated. If the Swedes know every inch of the Baltic, what's the sand under the Baltic, right?
Yeah.
And so they sent down the divers, and the divers came up. Oh, yeah. Well, what'd you find? We can't tell you. It's a secret. National security. We won't even tell our Swedish citizens. Right. So that happened in September, for God's sake, when the thing was blown up. Or October.
Yeah, and then buried it in the media. Like there were several months. I mean, even until now, they don't talk about it. It's just I've never seen a terrorist attack, disappear that fast from the media.
But the interesting thing was that at that meeting, which I briefed, and my shtick was mostly just to combat people who were disparaging, blaming Cy Hirsch for being incompetent. Just the opposite was the case, and I could prove it. Okay, So at that meeting, Russia made this case, and we really should investigate. The Chinese weighed in really heavily. So, of course, what's this place for if you don't investigate an act of war like this? And the Brazilian representative, who was three men to the left of me, he had no firm instructions, and so he was sort of wishy-washy. And the end analysis, which was really interesting to me, when I saw the results watching it on some program, it was 3 votes for Russia, China, and Brazil. How many votes against? No votes against. Oh, wow! What's going on here? 12 abstentions. A new record for abstentions. In other words, it's just too embarrassing to vote against an investigation that's clearly warranted. So the U.S. persuaded the Brits and everybody else, why don't we just abstain, So that's what happened to that resolution.
Wow.
They're trying to revive it now. But, the UN is so much under the U.S. heel that I'm surprised on occasion that the Russians and the Chinese continue to play ball with it.
Yeah.
I don't think the Russians would, were they not to have firm partners in the Chinese and growing partners like the Brazilians and the Iranians and others now that are coming to the fore. So anyhow, that's how it ended up. And when you looked at that vote, and you look at not 3 to 12, but you look at the populations represented by these votes, it's the majority of the world, no problem. Right. And so to talk about the U.S. isolating Russia, I mean, hello, it's just the opposite. These policies have left the world. Now, Richard, this is important, so I'll say it. Important to me anyway. We're left now with a lily white West against the rest of the world. That's not good. People talk about a triangular, multilateral thing, okay, but it's really bilateral. It's white people against the rest of the world. Almost all of them, most of them, people of color. And I remember, while I have the floor here, Rudyard Kipling had something special to say about this. He said, "It is not wise for the Christian white to hustle the Asian brown. For the Christian riles at the Asian smiles, and he weareth the Christian down. At the end of the fight lies a tombstone white, with the name of the late deceased, and the epitaph drear, a fool lies here who tried to hustle the East." If that's what Blinken is doing today in Beijing, I wish him a lot of luck, because he ain't going to hustle the East.
Yeah, I mean, look at the population numbers, like you mentioned. If we look at just the BRICS countries alone, it's the, it's they talk about isolating Russia, but if we look at the votes in the UN General Assembly, most of the world, they're either, how should we put this? They're not necessarily with Russia, but they're definitely not against Russia. Okay, so they're abstaining and either abstaining or voting in favor of Russia, it shows you it's just a minority in the global North, as we call it today, versus global South. It's
on that point, Richard. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, in an interview just this past week, talked about consulting with African nations and others who have always been under the U.S. heel or under the Western heel. And he said, I asked them to explain why they had to abstain and why they just couldn't vote against the U.S. And they said, well, it's just too difficult. We just can't do it. And Lavrov says, so I asked them, well, what would be the repercussions if you didn't vote like the U.S. wanted you to vote, or you didn't abstain when they insisted you abstain? And one of the high diplomats said, well, then they wouldn't punish us. then we wouldn't be punished. Well, that day is over, folks.
Yeah.
And, you know, it could be welcomed, except there's still a very real danger that these crazy people in Washington will not see the light, still think that they're exceptional or even indispensable, and let loose the dogs of war.
I mean, Ray, all of the years that you spent working in Washington and you know in Langley, I mean, you look at the Cold War and what's happening now. Drone striking the Kremlin, you know, a few weeks ago. This is unthinkable, even in the Cold War, and now it's like it's just normal. How do you look at this, having gone through the Cold War? You know, would you agree that it's insanity?
Well, we have Mr. Putin himself, who has described our policymakers as crazy. And that's worth probably quoting. Back in October at Valdai, the discussion group, he was asked a question, Mr. President Putin, why do you suppose the U.S. policymakers are taking on China at the same time as they're taking us on in Ukraine?
Mm-hmm.
And Putin says, well, I tried to see some logic in that. But I have to say, I think they're crazy, Putin's word. I thought that there might be some subtle plan there, but I no longer think so. I think it's a function of arrogance and a feeling of impunity, end quote. Now, I happen to agree with Putin on that. I think it's a feeling of arrogance, feeling of impunity, and this whole thing about being exceptional. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I think, for God's sake. What it matters is what Putin thinks. Now, if he thinks he's up against a bunch of crazy people, I mean, okay, so he's talking to his generals, and they're saying, well, what do you think? What plan should we? They've got to be on tenterhooks. I mean, they've got to be super ready for crazy people to act in a crazy manner.
You know, the diplomats and the people making policy decisions, do you think they've lost touch with reality? Because I feel like there's a great disparity between the people that you had running the U.S., let's say 40 years ago, and now. And I don't mean that they are no longer imperialists, but that at least in the Cold War they understood there's a balance of power that needs to be respected, and now it's just perhaps arrogance, like you described it.
Well, this is a first. You're quite right in stressing this or emphasizing it, Richard. Even during the Cold War, there was just a sensible agreement, unwritten, that you don't put another nuclear power up against the wall. Okay. John Kennedy said it in that wonderful, wonderful American University speech. He said, you don't want to face an opponent into where he has no other choice than to launch a war against you, nuclear war. That's what we avoid. Now, up until Ukraine, pretty much we avoided that. Sure, we sent submarines into Soviet and Russian waters and all that kind of stuff, and the warships and the Marines had played their games in the covert action people.
Yeah,
but to put a country with its back up against the wall, which is what our esteemed Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said, we want to weaken Russia, and what Rand has said in their papers, and what actually it was the Defense Intelligence Agency, the last time anybody heard from them, a year after the coup in Kiev, said, and this is a virtual quote, the Russians interpret that coup as a strike against their government and the first step in removal of Vladimir Putin and regime change in Russia. That is the consequence. That is the conclusion that they draw from that. Now, that was in a congressionally mandated paper that was sent to Congress and of course, never publicized in any of the media. But DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, had it right. What happened? They were cut out of all this other stuff about Russiagate. Just one little detail here. DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, had the portfolio for the Russian Defense Intelligence Agency called the GRU. The CIA wanted to accuse this GRU of hacking into the Democratic National Committee, right?
Right.
So what was DIA's role in that? Nothing. DIA didn't play in this game. They weren't allowed to. Why? Because they made that big mistake in 2016 of telling the truth about how the Russians were doing. Anyhow, the intramural stuff in Washington has been almost unbelievable ever since 2016, when we found deep state interference in that election and the 2020 election. It's out there. I can prove it. So can anybody else who's paying attention. You won't be able to get it from major media, least of all the New York Times. However documentary, however court testify, however under the oath it came. So that's the real danger. Americans have been so brainwashed on how to hate Putin, how to hate Russians for 7 years now, that I dare say, if Biden tried to wamp up some support for some sort of intervention with U.S. armed forces in Ukraine, most of the Americans say, oh, mean against that Hitler Putin, oh, we better move now. We can't do a Munich again. So it's just really, I mean, that is the fearsome thing that people have been so uneducated that they'd be putty in the hands of people who wanted to be a demagogue and say, yeah, we got to take on the Russians now. And what happened then?
In Europe, it's the same thing. I mean, reading French media or listening to French media, German media, it's just copy paste from British and American tabloids. Truly, just copy paste it, and there's no difference in analysis. It's the same like anti-Russia fervor, and they've been doing it for years, right? It's the same thing. It's crazy.
Yeah,
it's really crazy. I wonder. Back then, at least, when just internally speaking, so this is in the CIA and so on, didn't people have this implicit understanding that as you mentioned, going after Soviet satellite states, or shall we say former Soviet Union, like Ukraine, and with the salami tactic, that it's going to be considered like like your Russian version of the Cuban Missile Crisis, shall we say, where it's you're putting a nuclear power up against the wall, like this JFK speech that you quoted. Didn't people understand this on the inside, at least?
They did. Yeah, we did. And we had a direct in on the policy making there. While I was there in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So, it's very dangerous now, because what you have in place are the kinds of people in the CIA that Bill Casey and Bobby Gates, who later became defense secretary, they let these people bubble up to the top, not because of any experience in international affairs, but because they saluted when they needed to. Will the Communist Party of the Soviet Union ever relinquish power without a fight? No, sir. Right answer. Okay. Now, I was fortunate enough to be in a position where I didn't have to answer directly to those people. And the people I was dealing with downtown with the president's daily brief. I could answer them honestly, based not only on my own experience, but on the experience of other Soviet experts who were not under the direct tutelage or the direct control of Bobby Gates and Bill Casey. But the point is that those people kind of slithered to the top. They became so prevalent that by the time Iraq came along, And Dick Cheney said, "Look, you will give this legend about
Yeah.
weapons of mass destruction." Then they said, "Well, we're malleable managers. We could do that for the next promotion, or if you want to make a war, that might be fun." I mean, it was just awful to see that, because many of those people, I knew many of those people. I knew many of the people who filed in behind Gina Haspel, the torturer in chief, and supported her in becoming the new head of the CIA. I couldn't abide it. I stood up and I interrupted the proceedings in the Senate, and of course paid the
Yeah.
price for that. But you have to stand up and you have to call attention to these things, no matter what the cost.
Yeah, Ukraine's counteroffensive, it doesn't seem to be going too well. I'm pretty sure you saw these pictures and videos of columns of tanks just burning, and specifically these are Bradleys. So these are Bradleys and Leopards, American and German tanks, respectively. I mean, this was hyped up for a long time, this counteroffensive, and they used it to justify the delivery of all of these sophisticated weapon systems. So, first it was even Germany, which was supposed to be a peaceful country. They were saying, okay, we'll give some helmets, and then okay, we'll give some tanks, and now they're talking about planes. What do you make of this counteroffensive and how it's going for Ukraine? It doesn't look too good, does it?
It looks just as bad as most of us predicted. Those of us with our heads screwed on right. The sad thing is that you have the General Abrams back. You've got General Westmoreland back. You've got political generals. Now
Right.
take Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. When he was head of CENTCOM, the command that has purview over the Near East, 51, no, I'm not sure that, it was over 50 intelligence analysts filed a formal complaint with the Inspector General of the Pentagon saying he is falsifying our conclusions on Syria and on other aspects of what's going on in the Near East. We object. We're not going to abide this anymore. Over 50
Wow.
intelligence analysts risking their own careers? Yeah,
exactly.
They were down in Tampa. You remember that, okay? So what happened? Well, there was a Pentagon investigation that resembled all other Pentagon investigations of 4 stars, right? You have a 2-star investigating 4-star, you're going to get the predictable result, right? So where's Austin now? What is Austin telling the president now? So I think it's not any longer just dumb. I think it's unconscionable that so many people are getting killed in Ukraine now because of falsification of numbers, just as with General Abrams and General Westmoreland out there in Vietnam so many years ago. And it was all terribly predictable. I mean, we know about the Russians. We know how strongly they feel about all this. And not only the war on the ground here, you mentioned something before that should not be neglected, and I'll take a couple of minutes to do that. You said something like the Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, many people don't know that these medium-range cruise missiles, offensive missiles put on ships, have also been put on territory in Romania and Poland. Okay, violation of the INF Treaty. Of course, that's why we got out of the INF Treaty. Okay, so these things are in capsules and they're on ships and they're on the same capsules on ground Romania and Poland. Well, what does that mean? That means if you look at these things, they look like pillboxes, right? Like the things you take in the morning if you're my age, right? You open up, you take a pill, right? Okay. Well, what's under there? They don't know. It could be an anti-ship missile, as in these destroyers. It could be a surface-to-air missile, but it could also be a cruise missile. Okay. Now, if it's a cruise missile, what did Mr. Putin warn about that? He said on December 21st, 2021. Look it up. He was speaking to all his highest military brass. He said, look, if a cruise missile is under one of those capsules that we can't see beneath, it can reach Moscow in between 7 and 10 minutes. Okay. Now, they'll eventually get hypersonic missiles. Then it will be 5. Count them. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 minutes. Okay. Now, why do I mention that? That's fact. You don't get that in the New York Times. I did a whole briefing on this on, say, April 25th for the community church in Boston. You can see it on my website. So why is it so important? Well, because that's precisely the reason that John Kennedy did an act of war when Khrushchev put missiles in Cuba. An act of war, yeah. He called it a quarantine, but it was a blockade, okay? Did Fidel Castro have the right to have those missiles and to join any alliance that he wanted to join? Of course he did. Screw that. We had an existential threat. We had missiles already in Cuba that could reach Washington, Norfolk, Savannah, even the Omaha, Nebraska, where the Strategic Air Command was. And guess how many? 7 minutes, 10 minutes, okay? Norfolk, 5 minutes, okay? So what did JFK do? They said, look, Khrushchev, we've got an existential threat here. I'm gonna threaten to use whatever we got. My advisors are begging me to obliterate all you people. And we have a little team in Key West that's ready to go into Cuba. So take those missiles out of there. Take them out now. Now, Khrushchev prepared notes with his military, and they said, well, do we have an existential threat here? No. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. It was a good try. Take the missiles out. Meanwhile, there was a side deal. Bobby Kennedy, to his credit, was talking to Dobrynin, the Soviet ambassador. They worked out a deal that if Russia promised not to mention this,
In Turkey?
missiles from Turkey would be taken out, equivalent missiles.
Yeah.
The Soviets kept their promise. 4 months later, those missiles were taken quietly. Well, not so quietly, but it wasn't viewed as part of the deal, although it was certainly a codicil, right? Okay.
Right.
That's the way we did it then, okay? Was I scared about that? I was at Fort Benning, Georgia, okay? Second Lieutenant, Army Infantry Intelligence. There were no weapons. There were no weapons to train on at the Army Infantry Educational Center, Fort Benning. Where were they? They were all down in Key West, Florida. If I had been a couple of months before, I would have been down in Key West, Florida with those weapons, okay? So we were ready to go into Cuba. So that was defused. Now, why was that defused? Because there was communication, because there was a modicum of trust, okay? And because there were people around that John Kennedy could turn to, not only his brother Bobby, but Ambassador Llewellyn Thompson, who after George Kennan was the Soviet expert. He had just come from Moscow where he had been ambassador, and Kennedy said, Llewellyn, I want you, Tommy is what they go, Tommy Thompson. Tommy, I want you to sit in on every meeting having to do with this. Sit in with the Joint Chiefs if they'll let you, but I want you in on every meeting. And finally, it was Thompson that said, look, you have a really harsh cable or teletype from Khrushchev. He's probably writing that with his military behind him. And you have a pretty conciliatory one. So, hey, Mr. President, just answer this one. And that worked. So what's my point here? You know, when you have an existential threat against your country, you're going to do anything to get rid of it. And did John Kennedy break the law? Yes, he did. Did anybody say, oh, come on, President Kennedy, this was unprovoked? No, they didn't. Oh, come on, Kennedy, it was illegal. No, I didn't say that at all, right? Oh, come on, Kennedy, you had other options. He didn't have any other options. Now, am I comparing this with Mr. Putin? Am I daring to compare John F. Kennedy with the situation that Vladimir Putin faced and still faces? Yes, I am. And I do that because I'm an intelligence analyst and because I just look at the facts. I don't make moral judgments. Okay. That's how it all went down. And I've tried to explain that for the many, many months now. Look at my website if you like to hear more.
Yeah, it's just logic. It's shocking how devoid of any reason our policymakers and the media are today, because the media is supposed to keep the government in check. There's none of that now. They're just mouthpieces, and they have no understanding of Cold War history or balance of power. And I something else that wasn't covered in the media, which I couldn't find anything. It's the video I sent you of Putin yesterday with the South African delegation holding up a copy of a peace deal signed between Russia and Ukraine last year in spring 2022. And, the Russians had never mentioned it. The Ukrainians had never mentioned it, but they signed it. The Ukrainians signed it, so as did the Russians. But, it looks like they didn't hold up their end of the deal. What did you make of that?
The bottom line on that, Richard, is that the Russians have given up dealing with not only the Ukrainians, but with their sponsors, the U.S. This is very out of character for the Russians and particularly for Putin. This is revealing diplomatic things that are usually kept secret. Now, he hastened to add that there was no agreement to keep this confidential.
I noticed that, yeah.
So that's important. But still, the Russians have been extraordinarily circumspect, in my view, until now, not to reveal really sensitive things that would put the complete kibosh on any prospect of dealing later with the U.S. or with Ukraine or somebody else. But now it's different. Lavrov, the foreign minister, made a point of talking about Minsk and how the Russians were led down the primrose path. I want to quote just two sentences from it because Putin took a lot of heat for this, and uncharacteristically of any Western statesman, and Putin has said, "Yeah, they fooled me. I mean, I shouldn't have bought into that. I shouldn't have stood around for 7 years while they diddled us." Putin himself said that. But here's Lavrov, okay? The Minsk agreements from 2015. Yeah, 2015, 2016. Here we go. Many people believed, this is Lavrov, that Russia made a compromise that did not meet the interests of Ukrainian citizens who associated themselves with the Russian world. One way or another, that compromise was the outcome of diplomacy. However, although the document was unanimously approved at the UN Security Council, the Minsk Accords of 2015, our former partners, 3 signatories, Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande, and Pyotr Poroshenko, admitted that they had not planned to implement it. So the, quote, diplomacy of lies, end quote, was the only kind of diplomacy we had then. I don't know how the current stage of diplomacy can be defined. Later, he says, we're finished. We're not going to deal with the West anymore. We're turning to the East. Now, that's a terrible, terrible loss for the West. I mean,
it is.
Well, I won't go into that, but this is what they have dealt with, and what Putin is really saying now is that, look, okay, you did this. We should have fixed this thing in 2014 when Donetsk and Lugansk pleaded with us to accept us into the into Russia. And we said, no, work it out. The Minsk Accords, look at them. We'll watch them, and you just try to cooperate. Get some regional autonomy. We don't want you part of Russia. Okay. Well, when push came to shove, and this is what's really interesting. This is another thing that Russia hasn't really been as explicit about as I think it should be. In early March of 2022, after the invasion started, the Russians publicized Ukrainian plans to carry on an offensive in the Donbass into cleaning out what was left of the resistance of Russian-oriented people. They made what's his name, Konashenkov, the military spokesman, made a big deal of this, and we have the Ukrainian plans to go ahead and start this offensive in late February or early March. Well, why do I mention that? Well, people doubt, or people say, well, yeah, there was an uptick of artillery strikes, like in a geometric order of magnitude by Ukrainian offenses, Ukrainian forces against the Donbass. And that was also in February, but we don't know anything about a force that was ready to pounce on it. Well, that's what they said there. There is lots of evidence by very, very good watchers of this, including Jacques Bode of Switzerland. But the Russians never made much of a deal of it. Now, let me give you just a couple other things. I mentioned the 21 December warning from Putin,
when they
saying, "Look, we have these, these offensive strike missiles." Okay, what happened next? Well, as he looked out at those military people, he saw that his claim that we have to have something solid now, something committed to, something written down on paper. These generals and admirals, brighter, I think, than, well, I won't. Comparisons are invidious. They're looking at him and say, "Right, Vladimir Vladimirovich, right? Wasn't the ABM treaty written down? How about the INF treaty, intermediate nuclear? Wasn't that written down? Oh, come on. We need something more than something written down, Vladimir." What happened next? You may not know this, Richard, as closely as you've followed things, but on the 25th of December, Christmas, the Russians announced that they were pulling 10,000 troops off the border with Ukraine. How do I know that? Some enterprising reporter on the New York Post reported that, chapter and verse, citing the Russian source for it. Okay. Now, that was before she got the memo. New York Post, for some reason, is guilty of writing things before they get the memo. Zero. Let me just ask you, Richard, did you know about that withdrawal on the 25th of December?
I know they withdrew troops in spring of 2022, part of this peace deal, right? It's from Kiev, but not this one, no.
Yeah. So you have that speech on the 21st, then you have the 25th, move the troops, okay? And then zero reaction from the United States, not even from anybody but the New York Post. What happens on the 30th of December? On the 30th of December, Putin, Kremlin, calls the White House and says, Mr. Putin wants to talk to Mr. Biden. And they say, okay, well, wait a second. Why? You talked to him earlier in this month, and now our negotiators are getting together in Geneva on the 9th and 10th, of January. Please, Mr. Putin wants to talk to Mr. Biden. Now, to his credit, Biden takes the call. And what's the upshot of it? Well, in the readout, the Russian readout, it says, this is a quote, Mr. Biden said that the U.S. has no intention of putting offensive strike missiles in Ukraine, period, end quote. Whoa! I mentioned, they're already in Romania. They're already
Hmm.
in Poland. Well, okay, we could talk about those later, but this is a big deal. Apparently, Joe Biden was asked to make this commitment, and he did. Okay, so what happens next? New Year's Eve, rejoicing in Moscow. What's his name? Rushakov. Ushakov is the main guy for Putin on this. He's rejoicing. The man, those Geneva negotiations are off to a good start. Man, this is what happens. They go to Geneva on the 9th and 10th of January. The U.S. has no instructions to talk about that. It fell off the table. And the next thing you know, February 12th, the next and I think the last time Biden and Putin talked. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I think it was the most recent time. I think it's the last time that they talked. The readout was Mr. Biden refused to discuss his earlier undertaking about not putting offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. Now, my point here is simply, why haven't the Russians made a bigger deal out of that? The Russians don't falsify readout from summits, for God's sake, you know?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying here is this is a little bit uncharacteristic of the Russians, as I've seen them, and I've watched them for 6 decades now, okay? And Putin, personally, they've given up on it. They're going to release these things to prove their case.
Yeah.
Bit by bit, I think we'll see more coming out with respect to the threat that Putin saw from Ukrainian forces going to Donbass in late February of 2022. In other words, it was partly, at least, a preemptive move so that they didn't get too far. And with all the pressure on Putin, by virtue of the fact that he admitted that he was diddled, that Minsk was always just an excuse. And, you know, people should know that when I mentioned Merkel and Hollande and
Yeah.
Poroshenko, they said it. They said it themselves. This is just a way of delaying so we could get the Ukrainian army built up really well. And not only they didn't say, "Oh no," they said, "Yeah, that's pretty good, huh? The way to diddle Putin." So
They're proud of it.
Putin, I think, is under some hardline pressure from his own folks, and I find it sort of really refreshing that he feels that he has enough power to say, "Okay, I blew that one. I ain't gonna blow anymore." And therein lies the problem. Not only that, but once again, I've got China at my back. That, of course, was the
Yeah.
other main element of February of 2022, where Xi Jinping pretty much gave Putin nihil obstat, kind of go ahead. Yeah, okay, we really love Westphalia, but we see that your core interests are threatened. We see that you understand this is this is an existential threat. We face the same thing out in Taiwan. We know that we're next. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're with you. Now, if Blinken finally has gotten into his head that that's the reality, the Russians and the Chinese are joined at the hip. Well, I hope he will finally understand that, come back and tell Joe Biden, look, we're bit off a little bit more or a lot more than we could chew. Let's find a deal here in Ukraine before there's no deal to be had.
Ray, you mentioned that Putin's under some hardline pressure, or shall we just say, pressure from his own folks. I take it you saw the situation with Wagner, because what Putin and the defense ministry are saying now is that everyone fighting with Wagner has to sign a contract and be fully integrated into the Russian army. And Prigozhin is kind of saying, no way. He's said it. He said no one is going to sign anything. What did you think of all this tension between him and Wagner?
It was a Wagnerian opera, actually, wasn't it? With Prigozhin, the main singer. I have to admit, I don't know. when people ask me, is Putin firm in the saddle? I said 95% yes, 5% Prigozhin. I don't know how he's allowed to get away with all this stuff. Many people say, well, now that Putin finds him useful I don't know. I can't figure it out. So Prigozhin, I think, has some political ambitions. It's not 100% clear that Putin will run again. I think it probably will. But who knows? Prigozhin is a real slippery character. And I just confessed that I don't have a really good guess how to explain what he's been allowed to do.
Honestly, it made me think of Sudan. You had Dungalo, who was with his rapid strike forces, technically, within the army, but not really. So a bit like Wagner with the Russian military. And then, now the situation in Sudan is it's spiraled out of control, right? So he had political ambitions, it seems, and yeah, I mean, obviously only wishing the best for Sudan and likewise for Russia, because they need to be stable. I know this is said a lot, and I say it a lot because I do think it's a real threat. But do you think that we are closer to nuclear war with Russia than ever before? Would you agree that it's worse than in the Cold War?
Yes. And for good or ill, I would remind folks that I decided to major in Russian in 1958. Now I've been with it more than 6 decades, on and off, but almost always on. It's been my fixation. I think that Russia's turn to the east is a lamentable phenomenon, given that Peter the Great saw Russia's future in the West, that he tried to break through a window to Europe, right? Pushkin's poem. And that things seem to be going pretty well with ups and downs, but Russia has always seen itself mostly as a European power. And that means a lot when you think of how they've been demeaned by people like Obama and what's his name, McCain, right? Russia is just a gas station posing as a country, right? So here's the image, Look at this gas station here. Hey, Pushkin, you finish that oil change yet? Dostoevsky, get your head out of that book here and help me change these tires.
It's really the attitude. It's really on point.
And so they've always been feeling like they're second cousins at best, even though some of their royalty intermarried. But here's the thing. If you know a modicum of Russian history, you know that they had an experience unlike any experience we had in Europe, right? And that was 2 centuries plus 40 years under what they call the Tatarskaya Iga. That means the Tartar yoke. That means Genghis Khan. That means for 240 years, they had to be ruled by these very cruel people from the Eastern steppes. It was only when they came out of that, about 1440 or so. Now, the West was coming out of the Dark Ages. They were coming into the Renaissance, right? Okay. And so the Russians were 2+ centuries behind then and have been doing double step since then to catch up. Now, have they caught up? Well, listen to Rachmaninoff, for God's sake. Listen to Tchaikovsky. Read Pushkin. Read Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. Yeah, they caught up right quick. Are they as talented as any other nationality? Of course they are. And if I'm betraying a love for Russian literature or a love for Russian culture, well, I have that love. And to see that sacrificed as a byproduct of this crazy war in Ukraine is really very painful for me. And I try to get beyond that when I'm doing the facts, when I'm looking at the at empirical situation. But that too, I have to confess, is very hurtful and really deleterious for the culture of the world when push comes to shove.
Yeah, yeah, it's, I mean, absolute madness. You know, I saw the Czech president the other day saying that all Russian nationals in the West should be placed under, basically, they should be spied on. You know, he called it the strict security regime. He even referred to the internment camps that the Japanese were put in the United States. He said that, and you know, it's like they're demonizing everything from Russian nationals to Russian literature to Russian culture, all of it. It's I mean, to call it stupidity is an understatement. It's much more than that. I mean, if we're gonna do that to the Russians because of what's happening in Ukraine, then you know there should be no English or American athletes allowed to compete anywhere, or any Anglo-Saxon music or literature or anything. We should ban all of it then, if that's the standard, right?
Yeah, and I stopped at the Renaissance, but if you take Hitler, if you take Napoleon, if you take what the Russians have suffered in war, okay, we have not had that experience. We've been protected by two very big oceans, right? And the people we have running our policy have absolutely zero experience in war. The only person that can claim some experience is that fellow Lloyd Austin that I mentioned before, who falsifies the intelligence now. Okay, so take Blinken, take Biden. Now, Biden was around. I mean, he's only a couple of years younger than me, right? He was around during Vietnam. Do you know how many deferments he had, Richard?
I'm guessing more than one.
Can you count them? 5. Okay. How many did Dick Cheney have? I use a left hand for Cheney. 5. Okay.
Yeah, funny how they never fight.
For God's sake.
Yeah, funny that
they never wore. I mean, I don't know if they're Boy Scouts or not, but they never wore a uniform. So you're a Russian, right? You come out of that experience. 26 million Russians, Soviets, we'll call them, killed during World War II. That's not just the military, that's all Soviet citizens, okay? Now, how many do we have in the U.S.? Well, 440,000. 440,000 against 26 million. And all of ours, of course, were soldiers. And we didn't have any deficit, just except for Pearl Harbor, we didn't have any destruction. So there's a big gap there. And as the Russians look at us, they say, my God, not only are these guys threatening us, trying to put our back to the wall, but they don't have any idea what fighting is like. Look what they're getting their Ukrainian people to do. I mean, for God's sake, we can handle that, say the Russians. But do we have to keep killing these guys to make them have some sense? So there's the notion that every Russian family, if I can, I want to. Do we have another 4 minutes or so?
Take all the time, please.
I was in Yalta with a small citizens delegation on the anniversary of the German attack on the Soviet Union, and it was about 8 years ago, 8 years ago or so, and there were people there. We didn't know it, but there were all kinds of people there for a very big celebration memorial. Okay, almost all of those people, some of them were as old as I was, had somebody killed in World War II. And we were visiting the delegation. We were the first Americans to visit Yalta since the Ukrainian coup that we arranged. And so they said, well, would somebody say something? So I said, yeah, I'll say something. And I remembered a poem that seemed appropriate for the circumstances by the Russian poet Nikolai Nekrasov, who is appropriately called the poet of Russian grief. Okay. And this is the poem. It's very short. Внимая ужасом войны is what it's called. And ужас, it's almost like onomatopoeia, right? Ужас is the horrors, awful stuff about war. Okay. Внимая, paying attention to the ужасом войны, the horrors of war. Внимая ужасом войны, при каждой новой жертве боя. Мне жаль не друга, не жены, мне жаль не самого героя. Увы, утешится жена и друга, лучший друг забудет. Где-то есть душа одна, она до гроба помнить будет. Лицемерных наших тел и всякой пошлости и грозы одни я в мире подсмотрел. Святые, искренние слезы, то слезы бедных матерей. Им не забыть своих детей, погибших на кровавой ниве, как не понять плохушие своих поникнувших ветвей. Paying attention to the horrors of war and each new victim of the battle, I feel sorry, not so much for the hero, not for his wife or his friends, not even for the hero himself. I feel sorry for the sincere tears, the uniquely sincere tears of бедных матерей, of the poor mothers. Им не забыть своих детей. They don't forget their children, погибших на кровавой ниве, who perish on the field of battle. Как не поднять плохую шаиве своих поникнувших ветвей, just as a weeping willow tree can never actually raise its branches.
Wow. Wow.
Today's Father's Day, all right? And I kid with my kids. They congratulate me. We have 5 kids, and I say, I couldn't have done it without your mom. No, that doesn't go over well with mom. But the idea is, it's the mothers that do the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
The mothers that bear the real scars. And how many mothers, Ukrainian mothers, are now having to weep and will not be able to raise their arms, just like a weeping willow can never raise its branches.
Yeah, I mean that was very beautiful, right? Thank you for sharing that poem with us and saying it in Russian. And I only know a few words, but I'm happy you translated it. It's a very sad poem, and I agree with you, because at the end of the day, these people like Dick Cheney or Tony Blinken, they don't actually sacrifice anything or do anything. They're just they're all the way in Washington, and especially if you're in the States, you got 2 oceans on one ocean on either side. So I feel like they don't even grasp what war is. They have no clue. It's in England, we had the Blitz. So my grandmother, she was hit by a V1. She survived though, thankfully. And my grandfather fought in the RAF, and in the UK took World War II took a heavy toll on the UK. But it's only when I'm growing up, when I became an adult, I finally understood what the Russians had to go through, because we always talk about D-Day in the US and the UK and Canada, and that's all good. And there's a lot done there, but I never understood until I was an adult how much the Russians, and it's not just the Russians, by the way, it's like the entire Soviet Union, how much they gave. 27 million people, like you said. I said enormous. It's absolutely, mind-boggling. And we're still chipping away at them. And that's just cruel. It's just cruel that we have foreign policy like this.
Hey, Richard, you said 27 million. I think the most precise figure, latest I've seen, is 26,400,000. Now, why do I say 26 million? Because that's what Putin says. So those of you who accuse Putin of exaggerating, well, it's
Yeah.
just the opposite. He comes
Right.
down on the conservative side of things. He's
Right.
willing to round off 400,000. Wow, that's what we suffered. U.S. 400,000 plus. Okay. That's a round off figure. He'll say 26,000. Just try to wrap your mind around that, will you? I mean, I was a little kid. I was alive during the whole of World War II. I saw the little lights in the mother's windows there of people who had perished, of people who were in the service and all that stuff. And I waited in line for a quarter of a pound of butter, but we didn't suffer very much. We kind of relied on those 400,000 who perished, plus all the people who fought valiantly. But when push comes to shove, very few Americans realize that Russia won that damn war. Did we help? Yeah, we helped. I mean, a little vignette, okay? I'm in Russia about, 6 years ago now, and I'm at a celebration of the meeting on the Elbe, when U.S. and Russian forces finally met after years on the Elbe River in what used to be East Germany, right? Okay, so we're celebrating that. And I said that I recited that poem there as well. And then a general came up to me in a Soviet Army uniform. He's about 6'4". He had his full thing on, and he looked down at me. I'm only 5'11", 5'10" now. Okay, and he said, "Studebaker, Studebaker, Studebaker," and he gave me this great big Russian bear hug. And I'm saying, "Oh my God, Lend-Lease!" Now, Americans don't know that the Studebaker factory in Indiana turned all its war production over to what we in the Army used to call deuce and a halves, right? 2.5-ton trucks. And what happened to them? 200,000 of them were produced. Where'd they go? A large share of them through Iran up into the Soviet Union at the time. General Adamov was in the infantry. He was there to receive these deuce and a halves. They were able to go through incredible terrain to take artillery pieces, take troops, whatever. Okay,
but they don't mention that now. They don't mention that when they gave the Ukraine this new Lend-Lease. They didn't mention that the Soviet Union was the second largest recipient. They just mentioned the UK. It's like they're rewriting history. Yeah. Incredible.
But it was so moving, this great big general, right?
Yes, yes.
He didn't know any English, but he knew Studebaker. And my God, that was such a revealing moment. And that's what, Americans need to know. Studebaker, and how we helped the Russians, but it was the Russians that had already turned back the Germans, for God's sake. I mean, they had already won the war. With our help, of course, but Normandy was great, but it wasn't the turning point of the war. And that's not to disparage the bravery that happened in Normandy. And surely, I can't be sure the Russians would have won, but had they won, it would have taken another year or so. They would be all the way on the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. And, I don't necessarily think that would be a good thing either. So if people don't know history, that's what really gets me. They don't know about the Tatarskaya Iga. They don't know how Russia has always felt like a second-class citizen, despite Tchaikovsky, Tolstoy, Pushkin. So this isn't a background, but it's very much in play now. And I think, and I'll say this, that Putin has been very circumspect, has been very much the statesman, and not being provoked any more than he was provoked in attacking Ukraine. I think that the notion that it was unprovoked is really crazy and indefensible. That it was illegal, well, yet let the lawyers argue about that. did he have any other choice? I've been going around and about with other people of various persuasions. We say, oh, no, sure, he had other choices. I said, oh, give me a for instance. Like, I come from the Bronx, right? Okay, we used to give a for instance, right? Give me an example. The best example people serve up, well, Putin could have threatened a nuclear war if they didn't, right? Or, well, he could have studied Gandhi a little bit more. Well, that would have been nice. I mean, hello, he had no choice. We gave him no choice, and people don't understand that. And we can prove it. It's just that they've been brainwashed, and we need, you mentioned the mainstream media. That's where you come in, Richard, and that's why I'm privileged, I feel today, to spend part of Father's Day just trying to give out some information that I feel I maybe uniquely have in terms of my experience in Russian analysis. And so it's our job, really, and we can't be discouraged. Discouraged is not allowed. Disgusted, that's allowed, but discouraged not. So thanks for the opportunity for me to share these thoughts with you.
No, the pleasure is all mine. And just so I don't keep you too long, I just thought as a last question, because China was a victor of World War II. That's why they have a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. What do you think of how we're preparing to go to war with China with this AUKUS alliance, and provoking them with Taiwan? Do you think that we're going to end up in the same place we are with the Russians now, or that this is somehow inevitable?
Well, I forget whether I said this before, but Putin has said that it's crazy for the U.S. to be running the risk of a two-front war. And I think Putin is quite correct in that. As we speak, Tony Blinken is getting up in the morning to face the second day talking with the Chinese leaders. And it all really depends on whether Tony Blinken can wrap his mind around the fact that he badly advised the president 2 years ago, almost to the date, right? 2 years ago in Geneva, June 16th, 2021, the one-on-one, face-to-face summit between Biden and Putin.
Right.
Now, what we know about that is what Biden shared right after it. He said, I'm not, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to say what I told President Putin, but, he has this thousands of miles of border with China. And he knows that China aspires to be not only the most powerful economic, but powerful military country in the world. He's being squeezed. He's being squeezed by China. He's got this real problem on his hand. Now, I don't know. I wasn't a fly on the wall when Putin, after he watched that on the tube, looked at his advisors and said, "Huh? Where are these guys getting this?" They were getting it from the textbook they read at Columbia and Harvard, some chapters of which I wrote. When Russia and China were at loggerheads, when Kissinger and Nixon were smart enough to exploit that. We thought, and that was my portfolio, we thought that they'd hate each other forever. Not so. You know,
things change.
When you have a common enemy, you have a different perspective, okay? So that was 2 years and 2 days ago. Is Blinken able to realize now that the bipolar world or the unipolar world is dead? That it's really silly to talk about U.S. exceptionalism? That he can't talk to his opposite Chinese numbers with a feeling of arrogance, as though he were one of those British sailing up the Yangtze River there during the century of humiliation? Okay. Yeah. I don't know. These guys are born with silver spoons in their mouth. They go to the best schools. They're the best and the brightest. They have really nice shoes on. Okay.
They should be better than they should be better than everyone, and they act, they behave like the worst. It's
Well, it's
shocking.
actually so they think they're better than everyone, but they don't know any real life. One
Yeah.
aspect, of course, is they never served in the service. So, if Lincoln adopts the attitude of, for example, John Kirby, okay, he's the National Security Council, the White House National Security spokesperson. So
Yeah.
he gets up 6 days ago and he says, "These reports of China setting up spy bases in Cuba. Well, it just reminds me. It reminds me that from day one, we have looked at Chinese activities in our Western Hemisphere with great, great concern."
How do you think Russia feels then in their hemisphere?
Well, he's in China now. Will his opposite numbers say, "Tony, we've been watching your activities in our hemisphere,
Uh-huh.
and we look at them from day one with great, great concern." I mean, hello, they've got to hit this guy on the head like that proverbial donkey with a
Yeah.
thing, with a block. So I don't know how it will come out, but I think I like to hope that with Ukraine going down the drain, that even Biden and Blinken and Sullivan, maybe not Nuland, but maybe a majority of those three incompetents that can bring themselves to realize that it really is crazy to take on a two-front war. That maybe, if not Austin and maybe Milley or somebody else will say, we agree, we don't want to really get involved in it. We're not really prepared to do it. Well, actually, we're not prepared to one more war in Europe, okay? So maybe the sense will break in, but every
Hopefully.
time I say that, the opposite comes true. And
Mm.
I just think that maybe this time it will come true because I see the Russians moving all the way to the Dnieper River in Ukraine and saying, okay, now will you talk? Odessa would be willing to deal. Odessa, it's on the other bank of the Dnieper. You need Odessa to have a viable country. You need an outlet to the sea, or else you become just a big farm for the rest of Europe. So we can deal with Odessa, but we need a cordon sanitaire. We need some sort of a buffer zone here to make sure that your long-range weaponry doesn't wreak havoc on our provinces that used to be part of Ukraine. So, yeah, I hope that they will see that light, and I dare say that if it's the opposite, if they up the ante, send those F-16s, and they get involved in an open war between NATO and Russia, then you're going to see some real saber rattling, at least in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits. Mark my words, this will be saber rattling and perhaps even more as we fly these reconnaissance flights and push these warships through the Taiwan Strait. So they want a two-front war. Well, I hope it doesn't come to that. But they're going to have to wake up. They're going to have to really kind of be chastised and realize that, hey, the unipolar world really and truly is gone. Wake up and smell the coffee.
I mean, that incident with the ship about 2 weeks ago where you had a Chinese ship cutting them off, and they try to play the victim, the Canadians and the American Navy. I mean, that it doesn't take much to start a war than to lie about these things. Gulf of Tonkin comes to mind, but I mean, let's not exaggerate either. But yeah, it's a two-front war. I mean, I thought that's the last thing anyone wants in the military. These people, they're running on empty.
You think? Yeah. When you look at well, you have to. I guess my one advantage is I got these decades of experience watching Russia and China. China used to, back in the 60s and 70s, they used to issue warnings, and they really didn't appreciate how silly it looked to the West. But they would issue our 204th serious warning about your ships coming close to our shore. Now at this, the 214th serious warning. They do about 250 a year, okay? It looked really silly. They don't do that anymore. They don't even
They're done talking.
apologize for cutting off our ships. They're feeling their oats just as the Russians are. I just hope that they will have some kind of meeting of the minds before push comes to shove and there's an incident of some kind, because it's altogether possible that will happen. After all, you got these hotshots on both sides, presumably, that wouldn't mind colliding with a ship or an aircraft. And then the balloon will go up, and I don't mean this balloon that we shot down
the spy balloon, right?
Over the Atlantic, right? Let's just hope and pray that what we call them, the realities in the world, the real what's going on there in Ukraine and elsewhere will have a sobering influence on our guys. It's just so that they realize that, hey, we ought to end this before the presidential campaign really gets underway, so that Joe Biden doesn't feel like he has to be a war hero to be reelected president.
Ray, last question, I promise. You said you lived in Germany for a while. Did you ever go to Vienna? Do you have any spy stories from Vienna, given how it was in the Cold War?
Yeah, I could sing a song about Vienna. I love Vienna. But do I have any spy stories from Vienna? None that I have any personal involvement in. Actually, I could tell you if I did, but I was an analyst even when I was overseas. In a word, in the 60s, I was posted to Radio Free Europe liaison, so that what happened in the Hungarian Revolution would not happen when the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia. I was convinced that was going to happen. There was a lot of euphoria. No, Dubček, Prague Spring. Oh, we got those Russians right over a barrel. I kind of knew that it was just a matter of time. And so in August of 1968, it was no surprise to me or to the head, the director of Radio Free Europe, that the Russians invaded. My job was to make sure that the U.S. did not encourage, as we had encouraged the Hungarians, to rise up and get themselves killed. In other words, we regretted what we gave the Hungarians to believe with respect to the support that would come from the United States back in 1956. We didn't want that to happen again. So I had a pretty key role in making sure that they had good intelligence as to how far the Russians really wanted to go. Would they take Romania? No way. Those were bizarre. So I had intelligence to cool tempers and to give a real perspective as to what to expect. Lamentable as it was, and as sad as it was to hear the strains of El Moldau, Smetana, on the last radio station 3 days into the invasion before it got closed down. So that's what I was doing in the 60s and the 70s. I was a liaison to the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the German federal, German counterpart to the CIA. I was in charge of substantive liaison with the German government from an intelligence point of view, and I had not only CIA but Army, Air Force, Navy, NSA people who I had titular authority over. and who we kind of made sure that the BND had the best of the intelligence that we could share with them. And in return, we got a lot of good intelligence on East Germany and other places like that. So it was still an analyst position, and I very much appreciated it and found myself really learning a lot about the German people. Last thing I'll say is that we had a lot of visitors in Germany. I had the privilege of going to five Oktoberfests. And we usually had a visitor for every day of those Oktoberfests, right? Okay. So what did I do at the end of any visit to Munich? We went to Dachau, whether the visitor wanted to go to Dachau or not. Enough said.
Right. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for all of your time and all of your insight. And it's RayMcGovern.com, right? That's where people can follow your work.
Right. Thanks, Richard. Mm-hmm.
Okay, RayMcGovern.com. I'll pull it up on the screen in just a moment. And again, I'm very grateful for having you on. Thank you very much, Ray. Everybody, Ray McGovern. They want to know.
Yeah, well, spread the word now, Richard. Make sure that everybody who hears this shares it with their friends, because we have a really big educational challenge before us.
Yes. Yeah, we do. That's I feel like the education system in the West and the media, they've abandoned and abdicated their duties to inform people.
Yeah, that's where you come in, man. So keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, that's French.
This is Ray's website for anyone who wants to follow his work. It's RayMcGovern.com. Again, thank you very much, Ray. I appreciate it. Take care.
Most welcome, Richard. You take care too. Bye.
Okay, guys. So again, please remember to like the video, because I see we've got about 1,000 people watching, but only 700 of you have liked the video. So please make sure you hit the thumbs up. I'm going to continue because there's some more stuff that I wanted to talk about, and I mentioned this just earlier. Now, just a moment. We were talking for quite a while, but I mentioned this with Ray regarding this document that Putin was holding up. So what the hell is this document, and what does it mean? Well, let's go into that. I prepared a couple of things to show you. Just give me a second here. Okay. So okay. So I posted this video yesterday of Putin holding up a document, and this is huge because this document is a peace deal that was signed between Russia and Ukraine in spring 2022. So that's over a year ago now. So why are they fighting? Why are they still fighting? And I'm just gonna, this went viral, right? It's got 500,000 views on Twitter. Let me just play the video and then I'll continue, all right?
В Турции, дорогие друзья, Россия никогда не отказывалась от переговоров. Вот хочу обратить ваше внимание на то, что при содействии того же президента Эрдогана, как вы знаете, в Турции прошла целая серия переговоров между Россией и Украиной по выработке и мер доверия, о которых вы сказали, и по подготовке самого текста договора. Этот договор, мы не договаривались с украинской стороной, что он будет носить конфиденциальный характер. Но мы никогда его не предъявляли, не комментировали. Этот проект этого договора был парафирован руководителем переговорной группы из Киева. Он поставил там свою подпись. Вот он. Он есть. Он так и называется. Договор о постоянном нейтралитете и гарантиях безопасности Украины. Именно о гарантиях, о которых вы сказали, уважаемый друг президент Южноафриканской Республики. 18 статей. Более того, к нему есть еще и приложение. Они, знаете, сейчас даже не буду об этом говорить, они касаются и вооруженных сил, касаются других вещей. Все прописано до единиц боевой техники и до личного состава вооруженных сил. Вот этот документ. Он парафирован киевской делегацией. Подпись стоит. Но после того, как мы, как и обещали, отвели войска от Киева, киевские власти, как обычно, делают их хозяева, выбросили это все на свалку истории. Скажем так, аккуратно и постараюсь интеллигентно выражать.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that is explosive, truly. This is explosive. This is mind-blowing. There's a little bit more that I play for you in a second, but and we'll zoom in on the document. But again, just to reiterate, he's holding up this thing that in Turkey, okay, because Turkey was hosting these talks. Do you remember these talks? These were the most serious attempts to get peace between Russia and Ukraine last year after the war broke out, or shall we say escalated, right? And, you know, the fact that the Ukrainians have never talked about it and the Russians have never talked about it, you might be wondering, well, why is Putin bringing this up over a year later? I'll tell you why, because he's being visited right now by a delegation, right? So this is being you've got representatives from Senegal, from Egypt, from Zambia, from Uganda, from the Congo Republic, Comoros, and South Africa, right? You remember the president of South Africa saying that he wants to lead a peace initiative, and he's going to go visit both Putin and Zelensky, okay? So, you know, they're coming to speak with Putin in Moscow, and he's holding up this document saying, we already signed a peace deal last year. But it's the Ukrainians who haven't held up their end of the deal. So how do we know that it's the Ukrainians who haven't held up their end of the deal, but the Russians have? Well, he's saying it. The deal was that the Russians will pull out of Kiev. You remember they were surrounding Kiev back then. And so, you know, at the time, the media that we have here in the West, they were saying, oh, the Russians have failed. The Russians, their army sucks. They're incompetent and incapable. They can't even take the capital. So now they're pulling back their troops because they're having so much trouble. And you know, Russia is this and Russia's that. And that's actually not at all what happened. The Russians pulled back on purpose and left the capital. They left Kiev because of this peace agreement. Here's what it says. Here's the document that Putin is holding up. And here it is translated into English. Okay, so I'm assuming you guys are familiar with Google Translator, and so you can some apps let you feed images into them and they translate the text. So you can see here they're talking about what are the, you know, how many troops is Ukraine allowed to have? It says here that the armed forces of Ukraine cannot exceed 250,000 people, right? How many in the National Guard? How many tanks? How many anti-tank guided missiles? How many aircraft? Okay, how many mortars, etc., etc. Okay, so it's very detailed. It's very detailed. Let me just show you here on the map. Okay, so this is from here. I got a couple of maps for you. You guys remember this is from March of last year, not this year. This is 2022, March 27th, 2022. You can see in red, of course, you know, we always got to put the Syrian army in red, the Russian army in red because they're evil and dangerous. So here's Kiev, that's the capital of Ukraine, and you can see here the Russian forces around it. They're gone. There's nothing now. Okay, so They pulled back and they held up their end of the deal. And Ukraine walked away from it. Now, how do we know this? We know this because, well, he's holding up the document, number one. But back then there were these reports that Boris Johnson, so we go through prime ministers like socks in England, right? So Boris Johnson was the prime minister at the time, and he just randomly happens to go and visit Zelensky. And he tells Zelensky, drop out of the peace negotiations, drop out. I don't know what the hell he told Zelensky. Maybe he fed him some lie that, we're going to support you till the end. Support, more like support the weapons industry. But, Zelensky agreed, right? Zelensky did what Boris Johnson told him to do. And, this Boris Johnson could have been simply delivering a message from Washington or, a message from all of them. Doesn't really matter. At the end of the deal, we have once again another agreement that has been signed by Russia and by Ukraine and the West and is worthless and is not being applied. And when they tell you in the media that the Russians are the ones who walked away from the peace talks, the Russians don't want diplomacy. The Russians are just warmongers. They literally signed a peace deal. And this is not the first time. We've got Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, which I'll go through in a moment. What's going on here? What is going on here? Do you know the mainstream media? Not one outlet is covering this news that I'm telling you. Not a single outlet. The Russian president is holding up a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia that was signed last year, and the media don't care. How do you not care about this? How can you rationally justify not covering this, even if you think it's a lie? Even if you think Putin is a liar, this document is not even true. It's worthless. Then cover it and say that. They're not even touching this. They're not even touching this subject. The Ukrainian government, no comment. You know why there's no comment? Because it's true. And, that doesn't always mean that just because they're not issuing a comment doesn't always mean that it's true. But we are talking about nations here. These are goddamn countries, right? We're talking about the executives of Ukraine and, the other guarantors of these agreements. These are countries. These are national security issues. We're not talking about small fries. So why don't they come out? Why doesn't the media say anything? That for me is a sign of shadiness. They are shady. They are shady. The Russians held up their end of the deal. Ukraine didn't. NATO didn't. Let me show you this tweet here. This is from Professor Marendi, right? So he's accompanied the Iranians when they were negotiating the Iran nuclear deal, as you know, which is it involves Iran, it involves Russia, China, the European Union, Germany, France, and the UK. Okay, and so they negotiated this deal in Vienna in 2015, 2016, and then again now, right? So it's been on pause for over a year now, but he's always accompanied them as an advisor, and I've interviewed him multiple times on the channel. He's a good friend. Look what he says here. He says that this video with Putin holding up the agreement, this is similar to what happened with the nuclear deal. The United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany signed the deal, and Iran swiftly fulfilled all of its obligations at a heavy price. However, from day one, Obama violated U.S. commitments, and ultimately Trump tore up the JCPOA with zero consequences. You see, this is why when we talk about American politicians, what's the difference? People try to make Trump out to be worse than the others. Maybe he has a big mouth, but they're all relatively the same, right? Bush, Obama, Biden, Trump. What's the difference? And even Obama, who signed this agreement, nothing. And then Trump comes out and he tears it up because he has a big mouth and he tends to do things straight. And then Biden is back in. And keep in mind, Joe Biden, most of the people in Joe Biden's administration were in the Obama administration. They were the architects of this deal, so to speak. Where's the deal? Why, if Trump is worse than them, why won't they just put the JCPOA back into action? Why won't they just sign it? So in any case, this is another example where you can see how Western diplomats, they sign an agreement and then they don't fulfill their end of the deal. They don't hold up their end of the deal. And that is scandalous. That is a stain on these countries and their diplomatic corps that they can't be trusted. I want to show you, this is from, this was reported in Die Zeit, which is a German newspaper. And they interviewed Angela Merkel, who is the German chancellor. And she was interviewed. This is in December. Look what they said here. Look what she says here. I'll read it to you in German and then I'll translate. So she says here, that she says here in the first sentence, dass die 2008 diskutierte Einleitung eines NATO-Beitritts der Ukraine und Georgiens hielt ich für falsch. So this is very important because we talk about this Bucharest summit where, you know, they said from 2008, this is Bush administration, we want Ukraine and Georgia to be inside of NATO, which is, again, it's like you're putting the Russians and backing the Russians into a corner. You're threatening them. So she says that that was wrong. It was wrong to do that. But look at what she says afterwards. She then says, she then says that wir brachten die Länder die nötigen Voraussetzungen dafür mit. Noch war zu Ende gedacht, welche Folgen ein solcher Beschluss gehabt hätte, sowohl mit Blick auf Russlands Handeln gegen Georgien und die Ukraine, als auch auf die NATO und ihre Beistandsregeln. Und das Minsker Abkommen 2014 war der Versuch, der Ukraine Zeit zu geben. So she says that even though it was wrong to you know, dangle NATO membership in front of Ukraine and Georgia, in the end, the Minsk agreement, it was just a ruse in order to buy time for Ukraine and NATO. For NATO to arm Ukraine, for NATO to train Ukraine, right? So this means that, once again, you cannot take Western leaders and diplomats seriously, and that is shameful. And here is Hollande. Hollande is the French president at the time, who also signed this agreement. What does he say here? This is in an interview with Kiev Independent, okay? So this interview was December 2022. So look what he says here. He is asked by the Kiev Independent, quote, in an interview with the German newspaper Die Zeit, Angela Merkel said about the Minsk protocols that, quote, it was obvious that the conflict was going to be frozen, that the problem was not solved, but it just gave Ukraine precious time. Do you also believe that the negotiations in Minsk were intended to delay Russian advances in Ukraine? And then François Hollande, the former French president, says, yes, Angela Merkel is right on this point. So if you wanted to, you know, if your argument was that, well, she's just a quack, right? Angela Merkel is just one person, right? Well, look, here's the French president who also signed this, backing her up, and backing her up in a very bad way, because this reflects very poorly on the conduct of the French and German executives and their diplomatic corps, that you cannot trust them. They sign agreements that they don't apply. So is this any surprise now that you know, there was a peace deal signed between Ukraine and Russia that Russia, the reason they didn't tell anyone, because they were like, okay, you know what, screw this. Like we are done talking. We are done talking. We keep telling Western diplomats don't expand NATO, and they just expand NATO. They lie to us. We have proof from the diplomatic meetings, from the meeting minutes. They lie. They lied to us about NATO expansion. They keep threatening us. Salami tactic. You know, they carved up Yugoslavia. And then they try to put all these Warsaw Pact countries into NATO, like Poland, which is unthinkable I mean, forget the 90s. It's unthinkable now that you have Poland in NATO. What the hell is Poland doing in NATO? Are you out of your mind? Why don't you just why not put Cuba and all of Latin America and Central America in the Warsaw Pact, or, you know, its successor now? Why don't we do that? Right? Let's make them CIS countries. Right? Why not? This is equally as absurd. But apparently we have no, you know, no, we don't have anyone with brains in the West. The people who speak in the mainstream media have no brains. They have no knowledge or even acknowledgement of history. That's how ignorant they are. Let me show you. This is also from December. This is after Merkel was you know, said these words in Die Zeit, that the Minsk agreements were just nonsense. Let me show you what Putin said, what his reaction was to that.
Honestly, for me, it came out of the blue. I didn't expect that. It was disappointing. Frankly speaking, I did not expect to hear that from the ex-chancellor, because I always believed that the leadership of Germany is behaving in an honest way. Yes, they supported Ukraine, they were on Ukraine's side, but still, I thought that the leadership of the German Republic, they always sincerely wanted to help with the settlement of that situation based on the principles that we have agreed upon, including within the Minsk process. And what you just said It means that we did the right thing when we launched the special military operation. Why? Because it turned out that all these Minsk Accords, no one was going to implement them. Honestly,
kind of says it all, right? I'll play you the rest of his speech from yesterday where he's holding up the documents. But just again, please look at this so you understand what happened. That you had Russian forces that were surrounding Kiev last year, right? This is how it looked. Look down here where my cursor is in the bottom left corner. So this is April 3rd of 2022. This is where Russian forces were. Okay, everything in red was Russian control, and then everything with red in diagonal lines. This is Russian forces operating in or launching attacks there, but they don't control. So you can see here in the bottom left corner that Russian forces, they are near Kiev. I mean, you know, again, they're operating in eastern Ukraine, but they're also near the capital. Now let's look at how the map is today, right? This is June 13th, 2023. This is this week. This week. Are there any Russian forces near Kiev? Do you see anything here? Anything in red? Nothing. Zero. Zero. A child could understand these maps. A child could tell the difference. But we are dealing with heads of state like Zelensky, like Boris Johnson, no longer, and you know, the head of state is the king. But anyway, you know, these are our leaders, right? So so-called leaders in the West. They sign agreements and then they view these agreements and their own signature as toilet paper. They don't even respect themselves. You know, you put your signature on something and then you don't respect your own word. Then your signature is garbage. It's worthless. And you have no self-respect. You have no respect for your own person, for the office that you hold, and your own citizens and your country. That is the conclusion, the only conclusion that we can draw, you know, from Western diplomats. This is how they behave, and they've been doing this for decades now. They don't even have 1 ounce of respect for who they're dealing with, whether it's Iran or whether it's Russia, and they don't even have respect for themselves, for their own country. If you're not going to abide by it, then don't sign it. Why do you sign it? Because they're tricksters. Because they're playing games. That's why. That's why. Now, obviously, the diplomatic corps is riddled with spies and liars and cheats. Yeah, but we are not talking about, you know, some random contracts here or something. These are agreements between countries. These are you know, protocols that carry weight, or at least we thought so. Let me show you. This is Zelensky just laughing. He's sitting he's at the same table with Merkel, with Putin, and with Hollande, I think, right? So just look at him laughing. Actually, I don't see Hollande. It's Macron here. In any case, look at him laughing his head off.
Особый статус Донбасса на постоянной основе. Необходимо, конечно, продлить срок действия договора об особом статусе отдельных регионов Донбасса. И в конечном итоге придать этой норме постоянный характер, как это и предусмотрено в Минских соглашениях.
You know, maybe if I were Zelensky, I would also be laughing at Putin after having tricked him. Maybe. But then again, I'm not Zelensky. And, you know, I wouldn't behave like that. And, you know, maybe someone texted him a funny joke. That's not why he's laughing. He's laughing because they have tricked the Russians, and now the Russians are done talking. And the only reason that Putin pulled out these documents and held them up is because there is an African delegation in the room with him. There are multiple countries, Comoros, South Africa, Zambia, Uganda, Congo, Egypt, Senegal, you know, that have come all the way from Africa to Moscow to speak with him, and he respects them because he knows that he's not dealing with clowns like the ones that I just showed you here from Germany or the UK or France. You know, people that don't respect themselves and don't respect the treaties that they sign. You know, I really have nothing else to say. I mean, I have nothing else to say. That's it. This says everything. This tells you everything you need to know. Like, think of Zelensky. Why would he do this? Because now the war has been prolonged by more than a year. There are tens of thousands of Ukrainians that have been killed, if not more. It's probably more. I'm being conservative with the estimates, right? You got, what is it, 7-8 million Ukrainian refugees that have left the country. You had a shot at peace. You signed it, or your delegate signed it, right? The head of the delegation, the Ukrainian delegation in Turkey, who's dealing with the Russians, signed the accord. And then you rip it up, and instead of drawing down the numbers of your military, of winding down the numbers of troops that you have, aircraft, mortars, ATGMs, etc. No, you do the opposite. You start asking for jets. You want tanks, right? You want Challenger 2s and M1A2 Abrams and Leopards and Bradleys that end up in smoke. I get the impression this guy doesn't care about his own country. That Zelensky doesn't care about his own country. Why would he sign a peace deal and then violate it? What's so bad about saying that you want to be a neutral country next to Russia? You don't understand basic politics. You don't understand that this is a country that already is surrounded by NATO countries, and this is the last straw. This is the straw that broke the camel's back. The Russians are done talking. This is the conclusion that I draw from this, because they have had it up to here with Ukraine and their backers and guarantors, just playing games with them. That's why we are in a situation of war. And I think it's really regrettable, because I'm not saying the war is a good thing. I'm explaining this to you as a journalist and as a reporter and a political analyst, that you have a country, you have Russia, that has tried so many ways, so many diplomatic avenues to avoid this situation. So many. And all we get in the end is Western leaders spitting in their faces and taking them for fools. So just remember the next time that the media tell you that the Russians walked away from peace talks, that this is a lie. And when they tell you the next time that Russia wanted this war, that this is a lie, just remember these things. Just remember that. I can't believe my eyes and ears. It's like I'm I don't know what to say. Wow. I promised you to play the rest of the clip. Excuse me. Let me just as a last note, let me play you the rest of Putin's speech yesterday, right? What he's saying here.
Они отказались от этого. Где гарантии, что они и дальше не будут отказываться от каких-то других договоренностей? Но и в этих условиях мы никогда не отказывались от ведения переговоров. Уважаемые друзья, не мы, а руководство Украины объявило о том, что оно не будет вести никаких переговоров. Более того, действующий президент Украины подписал соответствующий декрет, запрещающий вести эти переговоры. Поэтому я понимаю вашу озабоченность, разделяю ее, и безусловно, мы готовы рассмотреть любые ваши предложения, но мы не отказывались от переговоров. Ну как? Отказалась украинская сторона. И декрет даже издали. Ну чего же от нас хотят? Они отказались от этого.
Pretty much says it all, really. Pretty much says it all. Whether you like Putin or you don't like Putin, this guy is the leader of the largest country on this planet. He is not a circus clown that is going to go and make up or fabricate some document. This is a serious man. Whether you like him or you don't like him, he's a serious man. And when he holds up this agreement and he tells you the Ukrainians signed it, you best believe it's true. The Russians don't play games like this. They don't falsify documents and hold them up like the way that Colin Powell will go to the UN and hold up a vial of some powder and say, oh, the Iraqis have weapons of mass destruction. Two completely different camps, two completely different ways of doing politics, doing business. Just remember that. Thank you very much to the donation to the people who sent in donations and have joined on Patreon. Give me a second to read them for you, because I was busy interviewing Ray McGovern, who's fantastic. Let me just read this here. This is from it's just a super sticker from AP6912. Thank you very much. Marvin says, ask Ray USS Liberty incident in 1967, the IDF attack. I'm very sorry I missed this, but it's good to see you, Marvin, and I wish I will keep it for my next interview with Ray. Make no mistake, okay? Because that is a very, very important thing to talk about. It's when the Israelis knowingly attacked a U.S. Navy ship called the USS Liberty, right? They attacked the United States, and now the United States gives them, more money than any other country in military aid. It's kind of like with King David hotel bombing in Jerusalem, right? The Israelis blew up dozens of people in a terrorist attack, and many of them who were responsible for this would never be able to set foot in the United Kingdom because they would be arrested immediately. They became Israeli prime ministers, right? So that's also another important thing. And yet the UK, for some reason, and the US, they both support Israel. I mean, it's just lunacy. When other people do that to us, we go and invade them, right? Like apparently that was because Al-Qaeda were blowing up Europe and the United States that was necessary to have a war on terror. But when the Israelis do it, it's a pass. Give them a pass, or passes. Cordy281 says, "Hey Richard, love the show. Can you read the subtitles if that's okay? Because I'm only listening most of the time. Thanks, Habib." Well, I think you mean when Putin was speaking, right? Well, he basically said that it's the Ukrainians that walked away from the negotiations. It's not the Russians. It's actually a long speech, right? He talks also about the ICC thing a little bit. That, but the main point here is that, the head of the Kiev delegation that came to Turkey, because as I said, Turkey was hosting talks, and Erdogan was trying to help out with that. He put his initials, his signature on this document, they never respected it, and there are no guarantees from the other side, right? So there's another super chat here from Kit Burns. Kit says, "Thanks, Richard. I'm glad I saw this. I remember the Russian pulling back. I saw this, and we can't believe our Western media. It's a game to our propaganda masters." Yeah. It's really disgusting. And one more thing that I want to add, and this is kind of like this is a side note, because you mentioned how bad the media is in the West. I want to say one thing. Do you guys ever watch the BBC? I have to, unfortunately, because it's my job to look through all this. But they have someone called Mr. Rosenberg, who's their Moscow or Russia editor, right? So he's working for the BBC, and almost every couple of days or every week he's preparing reports about Russia and Ukraine from Moscow, inside Moscow. So you have CNN also walking around interviewing people in Russia, and basically trying to find people that are against the government, that are anti-Putin or anti present government, and airing those views. And I just want to draw a comparison here, because in the West, RT shut down, Press TV shut down. The Twitter accounts, the YouTube accounts banned, the Press TV taken off of satellite. Whereas in Russia, the BBC are allowed to operate from Moscow. It's like, go watch the reports if you dare. And CNN just walking around interviewing people. Do you see the difference here? Do you see the difference? I mean, if anyone, and I'm saying this hypothetically, not that they should ban the BBC. I mean, so I think some of you are going to joke in the comments that they should and so on. And yes, it would be lovely. Yes, it would. But I'm not advocating for that. I'm just trying to say hypothetically, right? For argument's sake. If any government is gonna say that I'm under attack from disinformation, from lies, from deceit, which government has the right to make that argument? Is it a Western government or the Russian government? Which country do you think is being attacked by immense media presence? It's the Russians, right? It's the Iranians. So if anyone hypothetically wanted to claim that they're a victim of disinformation and that this and that should be shut down, it's really the Russians. And you see what the Russians do? They just let BBC walk around and CNN walk around. And in the West, they exaggerate and make up these lies about, oh my God, RT is so evil. How dare they do journalism and have, different views. Oh my God. Yeah, it's funded by the government in Russia. But are the views the Russian government's views? No. You have more diversity on RT in 1 minute than you have in 10 hours on the BBC. That's a fact. You can say whatever you like. You can do whatever you like. Press TV, RT, you got more journalistic freedoms there than anybody working in a Western channel or media outlet. And so, they exaggerate how evil and malign, as they love to say, RT is and Press TV are, just to ban them. Right? And they tell you, oh, it's for the common good. We have to do this because you guys are not adults. You are a bunch of babies and you're idiots, and you can't listen to politics and make up your own mind and draw a conclusion from hearing both sides. No. We will babysit you. We will nanny you and tell you what is the truth. And that's why we are taking away the other side of the argument. That's why we're shunning and silencing anyone who says otherwise to what the establishment says. It's for your own good. It's because we love you. It's because we need to take care of you, right? That's what they do, right? And I want to draw this contrast because in Syria, same thing. Oh my God, there's no freedom of the press. When you got people from mainstream media outlets, right, going to interview the Syrian president in his palace, right, and they calling him a war criminal to his face, right, and accusing him of dropping barrel bombs and barrel this and barrels of beer and whatever. Do you think a Syrian journalist can go to the White House and say that to Biden? They couldn't even go to the White House to kiss Biden's feet, right? Never mind interview him and actually challenge him. Never in a million years. You can't even get a tourist visa, right? So you see the contrast here. Do you see the contrast? It's incredible to me. It's incredible the amount of lies that they spew, and the EU, we have to ban this and ban that. Shut the hell up, man. If anyone's doing disinformation, it's CNN, it's BBC, it's Fox, it's all of them. This is one gang. It's one group. Whether it's by the way, same thing in German and French, because I see them and I hear them. They're spewing the same crap that you hear in English. There's no difference. It's the same political views about Ukraine, about Syria, all of it, just translated. You call that freedom of press? Where's the freedom of press? Where's the diversity? All I hear is amplified mouthpieces for the state. That's what I hear. There's nothing else. Thank you very much, guys, for the donations. I appreciate it, and you're very kind. And thank you, Pradesh. It's good to see you. And Pradesh says, "Hello, Richard. How are you doing, good sir?" I'm fine, good sir. It's good to see you. It's good. I'm glad to see your names in the chat. And thank you again, all of you, for the kind donations. I'm just gonna plug the Patreon again because actually I didn't plug it at all. So if you want to support my work, you can do that for $1 a month or £2 a month, anything you like. And I don't do like deluxe things or anything. I do my work. It's for free. You can find it everywhere, on Rumble, on YouTube, on Odyssey, on Rockfin, on Twitter. And if you are able to, given the blowback from the sanctions, I understand. If you are able to and you want to, please consider supporting my work, because you guys enable me to continue and let me, and you're supporting independent journalism. I see Pauline has just joined as a contributor, or should we say a patron on Patreon. So I owe her a crab dance, and I'll get to that in just a second. So thank you guys very much, and I'll check if we got anything on PayPal, because you can also send in questions or comments on PayPal. So thank you very much, Pauline. Here's the crab dance.
Clap for that, you stupid bastard.
And Corn Pop was a bad dude. And he ran a bunch of bad boys.
Listen, fuckhead, you have fucking crossed the line, claiming I'm the enemy. You got that, you goddamn son of a bitch?
I don't give a fuck what you think, bitch.
Good morning. Sunday morning.
Cut that bitch off.
Thank you for Iron Dome, which is a technical marvel.
والله انتوا كلاب بصراحة يعني. ماشي نشتغل عادي
Did we lied, we cheated, we stole?
China. 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 China.
And you ain't black.
There's always the macro and then there's the micro.
Do not come. Do not come.
I'm gonna come.
You talking to me?
Ladies and gentlemen,
I'll have 2 number 9s. A number 9 large.
we got him.
I told myself, I know it's not.
I've fallen and I can't get up.
Disgusting!
Why you texting? Why? You're getting nervous, man. Calm down. It's okay. Okay.
Suck my dick and choke on it. I yield my time. Fuck you.
All right, everybody, put your hands together for Pauline. Thank you very much. And we also got a donation here. I'm checking if there's a note. I don't think there's any note, but thank you, Leo, for the generous donation on PayPal. I'm grateful for that. And I'm just refreshing on YouTube. I don't want to miss any of your here we've got one. This is from 100 Gamer. Thank you very much. Kevin says, fantastic interview, great work. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate your words very much. Marvin says, Richard, please have Rania Khaled and Mimi, Syrian girl, back on. Yeah, I haven't had Rania on for a while. I need to get her back on for sure. I've never had Syrian girl though. So again, if you guys have any suggestions like Marvin for the guests, please shoot them in the comments. And yeah, also my email, RICHI, so Richie without an E, RICHI Medhurst @gmail.com. And I'm still looking for the rest of the Pentagon leaks, right? So one of you sent me a boatload of them, and I appreciate that very much. If you are employed by the United Kingdom's armed forces, or rather His Majesty's armed forces now, or the United States armed forces, or the Russian armed forces for that matter, do consider leaking, like Ray McGovern said and Daniel Ellsberg said. Do it before it's too late, because Daniel Ellsberg certainly did, and he regretted not having done it sooner. So, as I said, RichIMedhurst, RichardMedhurst @gmail.com. If you need to communicate on a more secure platform, message me there, and I'll tell you where we can switch to, and I'll give you guys my encryption keys. Also, I'll publish them soon. So, again, thank you guys very much. You're very kind, and I appreciate it very much. Thanks for tuning in. Take care. Ma salama. Bye-bye. Sweden wanted to join NATO. They broke with their decades-long neutral stance. Turkey was one of the only countries, I think, along with Hungary, that was saying, we're not going to let you in, because you need to have consensus, right? You need all the members in NATO to say, okay, you can join. Their bid has kind of been in limbo because Turkey wanted to, extract several concessions. It was very clear that they really want to join NATO in Sweden, and they were doing everything they could to appease the Turks. And then this moron comes in front of the Turkish embassy and burns the Quran. I understand that in their point of view, this is freedom of expression, and you're in Sweden, you can do whatever you like. But you have to remember that if you're trying to get Turkey support, maybe wait until after you've gotten it. I mean, this is just dumb from a diplomatic level. They're doing everything to appease Turkey, and then because of one idiot, they let this go to waste. The Germans and the Americans have decided that it would be a good idea to send Ukraine tanks. German tanks against the Russian. Man, I'm perplexed by this. What do they think is going to happen? Because even if you can train the Ukrainian crews who are used to Soviet tanks to operate British tanks, and then you got to train them to operate German tanks, and then you got to train them to operate American tanks, and that's if they can even maintain the logistical supply line to work with these tanks, to keep them running. What kind of door are you opening now for the Russians to do? I mean, this is This is very clearly escalation. While Germany and the US are saying, yeah, we're going to give Ukraine tanks, the doomsday clock has been moved to 90 seconds to midnight. So this is basically, it's a measurement of how close we are to the end of the world, to the apocalypse, to annihilating the planet with nuclear weapons, right? And this is the closest it's ever been to midnight, okay? Midnight representing the end. Ukraine's most senior military commander has said that his forces need about 300 Western tanks. Over the last year, NATO allies in Eastern Europe supplied Ukraine with Soviet-era and Russian-made tanks that have been ground down or destroyed in constant fighting. Soviet-era and Russian-made tanks. Now, Ukraine, having been a Soviet satellite state and part of the Soviet Union, it was part of Russia, you know, all of its military personnel being trained on Russian tanks. What do you think they're going to do with American tanks or German tanks, which they are not trained to operate? The Ukrainians know how to operate Russian tanks. That's all they know how to operate. The Ukrainians only use Soviet stuff, right? Until the last couple of years and until now. You know, this is the first major influx of NATO weapons. And again, NATO has been training Ukrainian forces, but Challenger tanks, this is brand new. If they can't even use the tanks that they're trained to use, what makes you so confident they're going to know how to use a Leopard 2 or an M1A2 or a Challenger 2? Man, people train on those things for fucking months and years. Both of these home secretaries, okay, Suella Braverman and Priti Patel, both their parents came to the United Kingdom, and under their own laws as home secretary, they themselves would not have been able to come to the UK, to be born in the UK, and to have a life there. So, like, the hypocrisy is so disgusting, you know, like, I got what I wanted, I'm okay, I'm secure, I can live in the UK, I'm the home secretary now I'm gonna shut the gates. Now I'm going to screw people that have literally nothing, that are so desperate they're, you know, risking drowning in the Channel or the Mediterranean Sea. People have to resort to risking drowning. They have to resort to, you know, hiding in trucks or swimming across the Channel, if everyone's ever done that, crossing the Channel because of her policies, because she forces people into doing that, right? So you literally have no choice. You have to be in the UK to begin the application. But what are people supposed to do? Just teleport, you know, for 5 minutes, write down the form and just get out of the UK? This is ridiculous. She's a liar, just like the one, her predecessor, Priti Patel. Why is Germany reluctant to give the Ukrainians tanks? That's a really tough one. I wonder why. Germany has long refused to send its most potent weapons to countries in conflict, a byproduct of its legacy of starting World War II and World War I. That's horse manure, because Germany does send weapons to countries in war. Saudi Arabia is one of them. So to get around this, the trick that they use is they don't sell the tanks and the ordnance directly to Saudi Arabia. They move it to Italy, and then from Italy they sell it to the Saudis. So they basically just insert a middleman, and that's how they get around this very, honorable principle of theirs, which they never abide by. If you go and you look up the Yemen war, I mean, you're going to see weapons from fucking everywhere. You know, the Canadians have been selling weapons and making money. Britain, the US, Australia, everyone. And the Germans are no exception. So I mean, the idea is true, but they fucking send weapons. They goddamn do. They do. Do you see how they move like snakes? Do you see how they move like snakes? They get the media to whisper in your ear, "Oh, don't go on strike. No, don't strike. It'll cripple the economy." Oh. No, it's not, like giving the army 800 billion to fucking bomb, 20 countries. That's okay. That money, we can spare that. But if you go on strike where, oh my God, we're going to lose like 2 billion a day, well, we can't afford that. You know the Pentagon has been audited, I think 5 times now, and every single audit was failed. That means they don't know where the money's going. The Pentagon is like a black fucking hole that sucks trillions of dollars, and the government doesn't even know where the money's going. I can tell you where it's going. You don't need to audit the Pentagon. I can tell you, me, Richard Medhurst, that money is going towards drug deals, towards arms sales, towards arms purchases, towards CIA fucking budgets and embassy coffee. That's where that shit is going, man. That shit is going to the spooks. That shit's going to the bombers. That shit's going to the paramilitaries. That's where it's going. You don't need to scratch your head. That's where it's going. And apparently that's an acceptable loss. That's an acceptable use of American dollars and taxpayer dollars. But, going on strike, that's too much of an inconvenience.